So far, very few children have become seriously ill with COVID-19 to the point of being hospitalized. About a third of them have a pre-existing condition made worse by COVID, such as a lung disease. The other two-thirds are premature babies or children with Down syndrome. And a SARS-CoV-2 infection can also trigger the so-called pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, or PIMS, a disease that attacks various organs in children, whether they have severe, mild, or even no COVID symptoms at all. Which makes you wonder, shouldn't children be higher up on the priority list in fighting the pandemic? Welcome to our COVID-19 special. I'm Monika Jones in Berlin. Good to have you with us. Now, we all tend to associate old age with frailty and illness, right? So when it comes to prioritizing COVID-19 vaccination, we all say the old and vulnerable should come first. But what about the young and vulnerable? Here's the struggle of a family that feels abandoned by society.
Micha Kutscher is a loving partner to her husband, who has suffered from spastic paralysis since birth. She also looks after her son, Felix. The family could really do with some outside help, but that's a risky prospect in times of COVID. It is very difficult for me to weigh it all up, because if we catch it, it will be very bad for the boy and for me too. The family has been living in almost complete isolation for a year. Catching COVID would most likely be fatal for the boy and his stepfather. Getting vaccinated would change all that, but it's been 3 months since the vaccination rollout in Germany and the family is still waiting. Right now, the pandemic clearly shows where the rights of the severely disabled are not exercised or seen at all, or at which points the UN Disability Rights Convention is once again just on paper. Felix shows us his room. He suffers from chronic muscle weakness, so he has to be artificially ventilated when he sleeps. His mother looks after him around the clock. Every night is a night shift, she tells us. So how is it, sleeping with the ventilator at night? Is that all right? Mostly. It's difficult for him to fall asleep. If he gets to sleep, then it's not a problem. For the past year, Felix has taken all of his classes online. His parents would like to have him vaccinated so he can go back to school once the lockdown is eased. It would be a so-called off-label vaccination, because the vaccine has not been approved for children. But Micha Kutscher says they can't find any support for that either. There's no one out there who says, please, contact us now. We will take care of it for you. Micha Kutscher also hopes that the needs of people with disabilities will be put in focus more. I hope this interview will make us be more visible to everyone. Until that happens, the family will continue their struggle.
And Professor Markus Knuf is director of the Clinic for Children and Adolescents at Helios Dr. Horst Schmidt Kliniken in Wiesbaden. Good to have you with us. As a pediatric intensivist or critical care physician and infectiologist, would you say that children have received enough attention so far in this pandemic?
So far, the focus of the pandemic has been on the elderly, especially those older people over 80 years of age in particular are at high risk of fatal causes. And that's why the pandemic is a pandemic of the elderly, let's say. Overall, children do not have a very high risk of becoming seriously ill. And that's probably the explanation for the fact that children are not in the middle of the activities around the pandemic, the fight against the pandemic process worldwide. So to answer your question, with one sentence, no, children do not have received enough attention during this pandemic process.
Yeah, especially now with the new variants, we see a rise in infections among children. But why is that?
Well, we do not really know what happens if children are in touch with SARS-CoV-2 and the mutations. So probably the previously introduced virus is more or less similar to a coronavirus, which is more or less frequent in the children population. Now the mutations are something new for the immune system, and that's probably one reason why the numbers are going up. But it's not good. There's not a good understanding how this works.
So do we then know whether all children are equally at risk right now, or especially those with a special precondition?
Well, good news is that most of the children do not have a very high risk to become seriously illness, but there are also some complications, especially in those children which are at risk, and those children are newborns or preterm infants or those with underlying diseases, for example, congenital heart deficiency or immunodeficiencies, as well as those children which were treated with immunocompromising medications in terms of hemato-oncological diseases and so on. There is a relevant number of children with high risk, and one prominent group of diseases, the Down syndrome. Those children are at very high risk for severe and fatal outcome due to SARS-CoV-2, and other children with, let's say, inborn error of metabolisms or syndromes, for example, like tuberous sclerosis and others.
And these children, they react differently mostly to the virus than adults or elderly, with inflammatory reactions of various organs. I mean, how worried should we be about the so-called PIMS or MISC?
Yeah, this inflammatory multi-system syndrome is not very common. So we do have observations of this syndrome in hospitals, especially in my hospital as well. But the numbers are overall the numbers are low. So there is not really a matter to worry about this. But at least there are some children which are affected by these PIMS, and there is an assumption that genetically determined susceptibility is responsible for these cases. So this means it's not random that a child affects. It's pre-described by a genetically determined susceptibility.
All right, Professor Knuf there. Thank you so much for your time. So step by step, we learn more about COVID-19 and children and about COVID-19 in general. It's time for your questions now. Over to our science correspondent, Derrick Williams.
Do the different vaccines protect people from the long-term effects of COVID-19?
Many patients who contract COVID-19 become what are known as long haulers, or people who have long COVID. There's currently no way to predict who that might affect. Although there isn't really an accepted definition for it, having long COVID basically means you don't return to your previous levels of health even months after SARS-CoV-2 falls below detectable levels in your body. It's affected millions of people who have a wide spectrum of longer-term symptoms, with chronic fatigue, for example, a really regular complaint. There are two big theories for what might be causing it. One is that long COVID happens when the body can't clear out all of the virus or viral fragments left after infection, that basically the virus is able to hide in some people somehow, and that the body goes into a kind of trench warfare mode. The second hypothesis is that long COVID is an unchecked autoimmune response, so an off-the-rails immune system. In some patients, experts say, it could be a combination of both. But there's no doubt that for people suffering long COVID symptoms, the prospect of getting vaccinated must be pretty terrifying. I mean, could getting the shot actually make you feel worse? Well, although I emphasize that we still can't say anything for certain, there are a growing number of anecdotal reports that getting vaccinated appears to be actually helping at least some people with long COVID. We don't know why. One small study in peer review also at least indicates that more long haulers feel better than feel worse after being vaccinated. The problem is, to find out more, we would have to conduct trials where some long haulers get COVID-19 vaccines and others get placebos masquerading as COVID-19 vaccines. I don't think that's going to happen, to be honest, in the current climate. Right now, I can only say that the general consensus seems to be that long haulers should also be vaccinated, and some anecdotal reports say it might help with symptoms.
Derrick Williams there, and he'll be back to answer more of your questions tomorrow. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.